Welcome to the Stewart Squared podcast. Today we're going to talk about Apple. We are writing a book together with the help of AI, and we've got a lot of great anecdotes about the rise of the internet and the rise of the personal computer, but we don't have that many anecdotes about what happened after 2000, and that's because I remember it very well. So why would I ask anybody about what was going on before then? But now we're going to start to do that. So we're going to start to get into the period from, let's say, 1999 to the time at which Apple released their iPhone. Does that sound like a good plan?
2000.
2000.
99 was peak internet year. That was the peak of the internet bubble. And 2000 is when it crashed. And there's a period of time between 2000 and 2006 where not much happened, except everything happened. And it was referred to as Web 2.0. And so there was the internet, right? And then there was Web 2.0. And I'll remember the guy that put that name on it. But uh, we should probably include this in the second convergence that we've referred to before, but Web 3.0, excuse me, Web 3.0. And Web 3.0 was when the internet became functional enough that it could be integrated with your personal computer and with systems, remote systems, and it tied everything together into a single high-speed broadband network in which anything was possible. And so um, Apple uh, was being run by Steve Jobs by the year 2000. But the iPhone was introduced in 2007. And the iPhone was the eye opener for everybody, at some level, except Apple. Um,
Wait, explain that sentence or explain that. What do you mean?
um, so Apple was a personal computer company, and everything in a personal computer happened on the personal computer.
Yeah, yeah.
You eventually had modems and then ISDN and other network capabilities, but it was not functional enough to change the computer. That was Apple's heritage, and that was Steve's heritage. Um, so when he came back, he had to deal with the product line that Apple had, and he did that with the iMac, the original. Is that what it was called? iMac, the cute thing with
Yep,
the colors and everything.
yep.
And that started to restore Apple's health as a business. Um, but when the iPhone was introduced, it didn't have internet, and I say that cautiously because technically it did, but it had done a deal with AT&T to enable connectivity in the iPhone, and so it had a web browser and it had connectivity, but it was 2G. And, we talk about 5G now, so you have to go all the way back to what 2G was. 3G didn't happen, and LTE didn't happen until a later version of the iPhone, 3G and the iPhone 2, and so on and so forth. So, it was cool, right? But all of the stuff that was cool about the iPhone was on the iPhone. So it was really just essentially a tiny personal computer that
Mhm.
fit in your pocket. And that was the amazing thing about the iPhone. And sort of unbeknownst to Steve and the rest of the people at Apple, it unleashed a whole different way of thinking about um, the internet. And
And computers.
because it was in your pocket,
Yeah.
right? So the first device in your pocket that had internet, even if it didn't work very well.
So,
Um,
and this answers a question I've been trying to figure out recently, which is why does the iPhone have apps? Why isn't it like the internet where you just go use a thing on a browser, or you use an application? Well, I guess they had applications on the personal computer before, but the reason is because you need to do a bunch of processing off device. So it was really like the cloud and the iPhone and the smartphones were really interconnected. There's no way you can have one without the other.
well, in the original iPhone, you could actually. All
Uh,
the functionality was embedded on, but Apple made all the apps,
uh,
um,
uh-huh.
Paint, the others. So it was really cool and fascinating. But they pretty quickly realized they needed to have an app store. They needed to have other people build apps. But because
Why did
the
they
entire
do that?
design of the iPhone was proprietary, they could control how native apps were made for the iPhone.
Why did they
And
figure that out? Why did they realize that they needed other people to make apps? Because that's different than what happened with the PC, right?
oh yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah. Well, but the PC was introduced. There was no internet, and it was a self-contained device. Um, the so uh, in the article I wrote about Dear at Tim Cook, maybe you should consider retiring. There's a link to a Ben Thompson Stratechery
Mhm.
uh, show in which he recounts the whole history of Apple after Steve came back. And it turned out that there was this guy named Scott Forstall who finally persuaded, this is within a year, because from 2007 to the second iPhone, he persuaded Steve that there needed to be an app store and they needed to create an app ecosystem. And Ben Thompson is describing this because he basically believes that Apple has never understood the value of having other third-party apps, having
Mhm.
other people build apps, even
Mhm.
though
Mhm.
those apps have made the iPhone, right? So there's a sort of institutional bias against independent app developers. So if you want to develop for the iPhone, you're doing it in not a hostile environment, but not a very supportive environment. Um, and so that's a critical moment in Apple's history because Steve's belief of controlling the entire ecosystem, including the applications, still fundamentally rules Apple's corporate attitude.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know if that answered the question you
It
asked.
did. It did answer the question. Now I want to shift to understanding more about your personal interaction with this. I have a story in my head that I'll share, which is essentially once you became a VC and you stopped being a journalist, you stopped interacting with the larger companies in the same way that you were as a journalist. So you stopped being as intimately involved with people like Scott Forstall. You could observe it from the outside, but really as a VC, you were starting to deal much more with the smaller companies. Is that accurate? Any anecdotes from that?
I call it as that's when I started to be just another VC,
That's not VC.
JVAC. If you're a VC, all you care about is investing in companies that are new,
Going to be big.
relatively
Yeah. Yeah.
that then grow to be much larger because that's how you make money. Um, Before that, I was an analyst pundit of the entire industry. And so I had to know who was doing what. And I spent a lot of time going around and schmoozing up, including my
Mm.
newsletter was read by them and my conference was attended by them. So I knew the people who ran the industry. Um, and I became a VC in 96. And 96 was when the internet started to happen. So there were plenty of internet companies that I didn't know very well. Um, like even Yahoo, uh,
Mm.
I met the founders, but I didn't know them the way I'd had known all the PC companies.
Mm.
And that was generally true. So then I was looking at everything as a VC. I was still wrote my column in Fortune, but I was doing that as a remote analyst, if you will, not deeply involved in the powers of the industry. And during that time, this is my story. During that time, from 96 on, the internet started to infect everything. Um, so, one of the deals I did, which I can't remember if I've told this particular anecdote, is I persuaded my partners at NEA that we should invest in an online bank that was being started by a guy who wasn't very well known at the time, named Elon Musk.
Uh,
And so I actually went to deliver a term sheet to him, and uh, without going into all the details, it turned out that the day I visited him was shortly after he'd fired the entire company. Um, he was the only one left, and this took me by surprise, and I reacted rationally, which I shouldn't have done, and decided not to give him the term sheet and not to invest. And that company was called X.com. And so if you think about X.ai and X, the Twitter, former Twitter, all this stuff, X has been this kind of part of Elon Musk for 30 years. No,
yeah.
30 years, yeah. So that was in 98 that I did that.
So,
Um,
and we have talked about that before. So let's go
yeah.
into the early 2000s.
Well,
And
just to,
yeah, go
to
for it.
tie that off
Yeah.
in the context of what we're doing, an online bank in 1998
Uh,
was stupid,
uh,
right? It was a stupid idea. The connectivity wasn't good enough to actually interact with your own account at a bank. So it was still a really crazy idea because we still used banks the way that we used to use banks, which is you would go to a branch.
mm,
They started to have ATMs, but they were fairly new, so you could get cash without talking to a teller. But you still had to go to the bank to talk to people. Um, there were no websites for banks, and so banks was old, right?
yeah.
And the internet wasn't far enough along to tell people that it would change the way banks work, which it has since done completely, right? No more branches. Well, there are still branches, but I went into I went in a branch for a local bank here. There were like three employees and no customers.
Yeah.
It's like, who the hell goes to a branch now?
Yeah.
Except very old people.
Uh,
And so, at the time I was doing that, the internet was not functional. And that's where Web 3.0 came from. And I don't think I really understood it at the time, but it was when the speeds and feeds of the internet connected to your computer made it possible to do banking, online maps, all the things that were generated during the teens in the early aughts. Um, so I
mm,
just needed to tie that off
yeah.
because it's not part of your memory, right? Because you were what, 15 in 2000.
Well, I
Um,
remember E-Trade. I used E-Trade to
yep.
invest in
Trade was the
Webcam.
first stock
Yeah.
trading company.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
so stocks were able to digitize before banks.
they were digital. You just used to have to call somebody up to do it for you.
Oh,
Then you could do it
because
yourself. And that's E-Trade.
and that
So
interesting.
every element of the
Yeah.
financial system
Yeah.
is already virtual,
Visual.
right?
Yeah.
Currency is a digital concept,
Yeah.
right? It's a virtual thing. It's not, you believe the dollar is worth a dollar
Yeah.
because the US makes it worth a dollar, right?
And
And not
it's always been virtual because the bank note is just a promissory note. So it
just a
represents
piece of
something.
paper that says that this is what it's worth. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that brings into a tangent. There's one little tangent that I'll just mention, which is apparently Bernie Madoff made all of his actual real money in the 1980s and 1990s digitizing stocks. But then he created a Ponzi because that didn't suffice whatever was inside of him. But we can just there's an
Yeah,
interesting
that's a whole other thing. I
yeah.
don't know that much about Bernie Madoff except he had a Ponzi scheme. So
Yeah. So early 2000s, it's really interesting because you said that's when nothing happened, but everything happened as well.
yeah.
And we're going to get Gilman on the show to go into how you met him. But let's
Well, that
go.
was way before that. But let me just stop and
Yeah,
say early 2000s, everything happened because like 1999 is when Google was founded.
yeah, yeah,
1999,
yeah,
not, 1996
yeah,
and not 2004, but 1999. And there's a whole bunch of companies that were started when nothing was happening that ended up being incredibly important.
yeah,
So this is a pattern in the tech business that when you're not looking is when stuff happens.
yeah,
If
yeah,
you're looking, when everybody's looking at something, so right now everybody's
yeah,
looking at AI.
exactly. Yeah,
But which AI is
yeah,
really going to be the one that
yeah,
makes it happen,
yeah,
right? So same thing
yeah,
back then. Google was cool. It was really cool. And the internet bubble burst while Google was being cool, but
yeah,
before it had found a business model.
yeah. So, and that really does apply to AI because I'm waiting for everybody to not pay attention to it. But in some senses, it
Yeah.
might play
You have
out
a
differently.
Ghibli? Do you have a Ghibli thing? Did
Yeah,
you do it?
well, it might play out differently. I have not played with Ghibli. I like to watch those things happen, but I don't like to
Yeah.
participate in them.
But, like father, like son, or
And
like son,
apparently,
father,
like your
whichever.
father too,
Yeah.
in terms of politics. Now, but there might be a difference in AI now because AI is essentially a way of the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. So
Can I
there are
give you
people.
credit? Who said that?
Uh, it's not Andreessen. Is it Andreessen?
No,
No.
no,
Who
no. It
said
was
it?
much older than that.
Yeah.
Uh, like it's right on it. You're
Yeah.
searching, but the
Yeah.
um, the thing with when everybody's paying attention, and this has happened multiple times when everybody's paying attention to the PC, and particularly IBM, but IBM is a footnote in the history of the PC. It was Microsoft. And so, and when, when the internet happened, the WorldCom, the early internet companies,
Mm,
gone, right? And what really matters is Google search and other pieces of the infrastructure. So
mm,
AI is going now, and the one thing you can tell, and I said this when I was writing about Tim Cook, nobody really knows where it's going to end up. Everybody's got an opinion and
mm,
everybody's paying attention, but you don't really know. OpenAI just could crash and burn because of fiscal mismanagement, right? Because they're burning so
mm.
much money. And Sam Altman even made a joke last week. Our
Servers are
our
burned and down.
GPUs are melting,
Yeah,
and because of the Ghibli thing.
yeah.
And it's really cool. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to end up being the right thing. Maybe it'll
Well,
be X.AI or now X.AI plus X. Um,
well, yeah, well, and so Anthropic is really interesting because while OpenAI is becoming the sort of drama queen and always has been the drama queen, Anthropic is just silently executing over and over and over again.
Claude 3.5, yeah.
Yeah, Claude 3.5 to Claude 3.7 now. And the reason why they have Claude 3.7, which most of the vibe coders don't like anymore because it's so over eager that it will build really random things if you
Uh,
use that interface in the chatbot. But I think they built 3.7 not for the chatbot experience, but for developers developing things inside of command line interface. Because
real
the
cut.
yeah, because the experience of using that command line interface thing is really, really magical. It's like it's pretty cool. And you don't pay for it in a subscription. You pay for it metered. Ooh,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
good territory. This is good territory because you don't pay for it a subscription. When the hell did we start paying for software as a subscription? Because that thing pisses me off.
Yeah.
Like, why?
Well,
Why
okay.
did it happen?
Okay, but it's
Yeah.
like subscriptions have always been important.
Uh,
And there's an economic model associated with subscriptions, which I happen to know about because I was
yeah.
in the
Yeah.
magazine industry,
Yeah. Yeah.
which was half revenue from subscription and half from ads. Whereas in television, it was all ads, and books, it was all
Interesting.
transactions. And so you had multiple ways to pay for something. And subscriptions were magical because if you charged X, whatever the X might be, and I hesitate to use the letter X, but Y, whatever. Uh, if you paid $20 a year, you could predict which number you would get to. You'd start to make money, and then you'd cross over and you'd start making a lot of money, right? Because you're getting it directly from subscribers. As long as you're getting them to renew, your cost of acquisition goes down. This is part of the magazine business from the 60s in the
Yeah.
70s. Um, that is magic on the internet because you don't have to send out direct mail. There's no cost of acquisition, right? Substack is an amazing thing, and the free press is very interesting as an instance of Substack. So software companies, and this is where it came from, is from playing games on mobile.
Yeah.
There was this concept of free to play,
Mm-hmm.
which happened
Mm,
with Web 3.0,
mm,
where the experience of playing the game led you to spend money in transactions inside the game,
mm,
buying
mm,
avatars or buying,
mhm, mhm,
add-ons.
mhm.
Um, and and then when it became mobile, because Apple was the gatekeeper, um, it ended up working better to buy subscriptions. And so
Mm,
subscriptions is the holy grail of anything on the internet. Now, if you can get customers to spend it directly with you, you don't have to go through distribution. Still on the mobile phone, you have to pay 30% both Google and Apple. But if you can get people to subscribe, it means you always have money coming in. So the concept of ARR in the enterprise, the concept of subscribing versus transacting, subscriptions are magical. And
but
then you look at
yeah,
streaming,
yeah,
and you got like Netflix is charging
yeah. Consumers, yeah.
24.99 a month, I think is their base rate now, which is like twice what it used to be. So they've raised their prices by 100 and are still getting more subscribers. And that company is incredibly powerful as a
So,
result.
so
Subscriptions are very wonderful until people start to rebel against it, right? So if people go look at how much money they're spending on subscriptions, and this is really true in AI.
yeah,
I've got
yeah,
$20 a
yeah,
month subscriptions to Chat GPT and Perplexity, and I think I have them to Claude, and I haven't
yeah,
used it.
yeah,
I've got like $100 a month worth of
yeah.
AI subscriptions now. I can afford it because my firm pays for it. But normal people will sit there and go, yeah, that's too much. Except I pay $120 a month for my Starlink subscription,
Mm.
and and another $140 a month to Comcast. And God, if I went and looked at how much I'm paying in subscriptions, I'd be horrified.
Well, and this is the thing. I just recently used Claude Code to build out a website or actually develop a utility that I can then share on my own server. And I went into the server and I figured out what a server was, and I actually kind of like it. That's the funny part. I don't like much of the other web development stuffs, but figuring out what a server, I put a firewall on it. I figured out what a firewall is, and like I did all these things, and I just had Claude just telling me what to do. So which brings in another funny thing about management because I Claude basically manages me, even though I'm managing the whole thing of what I want to do. It then tells me what to do, which is funny.
You're
Um,
a willing robot.
yeah, it's turning me into a robot. I'm
Uh,
managing it to turn me into a robot.
You're cool. You're
I'm
okay
cool
with
with it. Yeah, I'm okay with it. For now, and then so I went and I built this app that I before I had to pay for myself to have a Descript app subscription and my freelancer to have a Descript for translation transcription, and she would go each week and do all the transcriptions for all the different podcasts. I've now built out that functionality on my own, this one little tiny slice of what Descript offers, and then I canceled my Descript subscription. So I'm no longer paying for it. And that was made possible by one subscription. But in this, like this, just so is it accurate that the subscription model is because of Apple and the iPhone? Is that what started it?
No, I wouldn't say that.
SaaS for SaaS business.
SaaS started with the cloud, right? So it's coincident.
Yeah.
It's not that the iPhone or Apple started this. It's this thing that was also going on at the same time. And it goes back to the functional internet, right? The Web 3.0 and the broadband internet. You can do cloud because we're all connected at high speeds, including companies in their servers. Um, so it just started very small with AWS. Amazon Web Services was the beginning of that. And they started by selling to software developers, people who were making web-based apps, because those people understood the technical issues. Enterprises did not adopt the cloud in the beginning. It was software developers did, and software
Yeah,
companies and
interesting.
web services companies. And they started, and that gave Amazon such a lead that they are dominant. It's what always happens. There's a number two, which is Microsoft with Azure, and a
Yeah,
number three, which is Google with Google Cloud.
yeah.
Because Google's really late to this, ironically, since they were the web service company with web apps. But um, so so the enterprise right now in 2025, I think I've seen the number that enterprises are operating 40% of their infrastructure on the cloud,
Mm,
right? This is
mm,
like their internal
yeah,
infrastructure and their external,
yeah.
40%. So it's gone from 0% when AWS was introduced to 40% now. There's still another 60% left
Mm,
for enterprises to trust the
mm,
cloud enough and to integrate it into their operations that they don't have to have their own servers in the basement. They don't have to have them
mm,
sitting in the
mm,
basement.
mm.
It's all rented now and annual recurring revenue. And that's the enterprise, right? But Netflix,
It's
which does
100%.
have its own infrastructure and does stream its own
Oh,
stuff,
yeah,
is still using AWS.
yeah.
And so when they uh, put that fight on Netflix, the thing with
Jake
can't
Paul.
remember Jake Paul and what's his name, that didn't work very well because they'd never done live streaming, and Amazon hadn't done live. Well, Amazon does Twitch, right? They know about live
Yeah,
streaming,
interesting.
but the sensitivity of that, but they learned fast enough between them, Netflix and AWS, that by the time they did the Christmas Day football games, worked perfectly. And that's real time live streaming, and that's like a penultimate of high speed internet infrastructure, which is now beginning to infuse out. Right, tech companies do it, and non tech companies are beginning to try it. So all this is to say that at some point, cloud services will be 100%, both of the enterprise and of the internet and everything else, right? There's really no reason going forward to have your own server farms. There is still
Mm,
an advantage there, but not much of one.
mm,
And that advantage goes away. So you have to track that in terms of what's going on. So, and AI is the penultimate internet service because
mm,
they go out there and they suck all this data
yeah.
out of text originally and now pictures and videos, um, and munge it all together in an LLM. And every LLM has to be redeveloped for new data. Um, the they are sitting
Mm,
there
mm,
just sucking all that power up and doing it in real time. That's still a batch process. So I'll go down my sidetrack there. But um, so so when do we get to the point? And this is why Elon Musk's brain thing is so interesting because functionally, just like he's predicting Mars for SpaceX, he's basically saying eventually we're just going to be plugged in.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
all going to be real time,
yeah.
and and your brain and the internet are going to be cooperating with each other.
Well, there's a bunch of things I want to ask you that I'll actually save. I'll go add those to my to-do list based on what you just said. But the more important part is getting to the Evernet. When did you come up with the Evernet, and who? And then the background question also is who are the interesting people, or what happened in like 2001 to 2006 that really sums up what we've been talking about here?
Yeah, I'm trying to cast myself back. Um, so 2006 is when we raised our first fund.
Oh, so
2000
there's
is
six
when the
years
internet
there
first.
between NEA. So wait, and you were at NEA all the way until
I
what?
was in NEA from 1996 to 1995. I mean, 2005.
Okay, got it. Yeah, yeah,
And so I was the internet guy at
yeah.
NEA.
Okay.
And which I mean, I like talking about that because there were a bunch of things that NEA wouldn't let me do, like
Yeah,
open table,
yeah.
which
Turned
ended
out to
up
be
being,
good.
yeah, would have
Yeah,
made a lot of, there are things I didn't do that ended up making a lot of money. It
yeah,
wasn't just NEA's
yeah.
fault, but in that period of time between 1996 and 2000 was when like everybody's going crazy, going like, holy crap, we got the internet. We could do all this. We could do this. We could do that. We could do
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
like banks or stock trading or stuff like that, which was all very early and very ill-formed. And then the internet bubble burst in 2000. And from 2000 to 2006, I mean, venture capital went from 100 billion a year to five, something like that. It's like just crashed. Um, and then I got fired by Eddie, and Gilman and I chose to raise a fund in 2006. And we didn't know it at the time, but 2006 was the first year that venture capital came back. So when we raised our fund, the people investing in venture capital wanted to invest in venture capital, and we were sitting there. Worked great. And we
Mm,
raised our fund in 6 months, and we started investing. And as we started investing was the beginning of Web3 and the social media and the cloud. And, it was a point in time where the internet trading off the ruins of the internet bubble. Um, I'll do a little sidetrack
yeah.
here. Bill Gurley spoke at my conference.
When?
Pretty sure, I know this is pretty early on. And I'm trying to remember when I stopped running the conference. It might have been in a different environment, but he gave a speech about digging trenches for the internet. And in order to install fiber optic all over the country, and we're just talking the country right now,
Yeah,
um, the US of A, it's huge, right? So how do you make bits move really fast? At the time, the only option was fiber optic cable. And so people were buying up rights of way on the railroads and installing fiber optics along those rights of way. Um, and Level 3, I think, is the company that was doing it. And a huge issue in fiber optics was terminating those fiber optic cables to the rest of the internet. And
mhm, mhm.
he did that through through optics. So you had to recognize the light stream coming off the fiber optic and then convert it into data that would go over cable and copper and other stuff. So you had to integrate these things.
Wow.
That happened in from 1998 to 2001.
Uh-huh.
And during those years, billions of dollars were invested in building out a physical infrastructure for the internet. And those companies all failed.
Yeah.
All of them
Yeah.
failed and were assets that were purchased by other companies
Mm.
during the bubble bursting of the bubble, right, in 2002 going on. And that infrastructure is what has been powering the high-speed internet since, right? So the cables actually got installed, they got hooked up, and the companies that did it didn't profit from it, but the companies that bought those assets did.
Yeah.
And so, um, and this is really invisible to most of,
Yeah.
even in the tech business.
Yeah.
And so by the time we started to come back from the internet bubble and venture capital started being available, the infrastructure was in place mostly for high-speed internet
Yeah.
and Web 3.0. Guess I could remember the guy that came up with that term. He's
I found it, but now it's gone.
it's a technical publisher in Sonoma County. Uh, I could see his face. And, well, but can't, memory fails me in this particular regard. But
David
anyway,
DiNucci, Darcy DiNucci,
no,
Tim O'Reilly,
Tim O'Reilly. That's
Dale
it.
Dougherty.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He named it Web 3.0, and he
And
was
it's Web
smart enough.
2.0. It's Web 2.0 because Web 3.0 is the
Right.
crypto.
Some people tried to call it Web 3.0 later, the next evolution, but
Yeah.
that's actually social media in the cloud. So Web
Yeah.
2.0 was the second iteration of web browsing, which was the early internet, but it was the one that was functional because it was high speed enough that you could render
Oh,
websites, you could do graphics, you could do stuff that
wait.
previously had too
So
much.
you're saying that so Web 2.0 was built in I'm looking at Perplexity here from 1999 to 2004. They named it at Web 2.0 conference in 2004. You're saying that
Yeah,
Web 2.0 is actually because I associate Web 2.0 with social media, but what you're saying is that it's
right.
actually, but
It's the precursor. It's the
it's the
precursor.
precursor to that, and that you're
Yeah.
calling Web 3.0 the social media thing. But do you know
Yeah.
that
Which people don't call it Web 3.0. There were some early attempts to say, well, if you have Web 2.0, then you have Web 3.0.
because people
2.0 was the beginnings of a functional high-speed broadband internet. And then social media happened on the next instance, which is, we invested in Twitch in 2007.
mm,
And when
mm,
was Facebook founded? When was Twitter founded? That was all the stuff that was happening because that infrastructure had been put in place. And you could do things like, millions of people could share 140 characters at a time and everybody would get it instant updates.
mm.
That real-time updating is the core technology of both Twitter and Facebook. And also iMessage and WhatsApp and the other instant messaging things. So um,
So you know that Web 3.0 is also the term that crypto people talk about to,
yes, that's it.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
You just
okay.
sorted it out for me.
Yeah,
Web 3.0, because in order to do the blockchain and the Bitcoin and the currencies,
yeah,
it had to be instant. You couldn't wait like
yeah,
5 minutes
yeah,
for the blockchain to update itself, right? In theory.
yeah,
And um, that's a whole another topic, but
yeah.
that was
Oh, distributed
fundamental.
systems. Got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay. Now, let's here. I think we finally found the anecdote, which is 2007 investing in Twitch. How did you get in that deal?
Well, there's a story we tell and there's reality, right? Because it's a successful deal, we of course say we knew what was going to happen.
Yeah,
It's completely random. Um, Corey Reese.
yeah.
He was our first campus associate at Alsop Partners, and he was a student at Berkeley, but he was preternatural at schmoozing,
Yeah.
networking,
Uh,
just like knew everything that was going on in the
mm,
early social media
mm,
space.
mm,
And
mm,
so
mm.
he picked up immediately when what became the Justin TV guys, which became Twitch, when they formed and were living in an apartment in San Francisco, and Justin was live casting his life casting, and wearing a camera on his hat and a backpack with modems and stuff in it. So he said to Gilman, "You should look at this deal." And Gilman said to me, "This is your thing. You should." And he told me that when I was at a conference, a Recode conference in Southern California. So I actually flew back to San Francisco, went from the airport to their apartment, and made an offer to invest in a company on the spot. And it was like, I can't really justify it in hindsight, but that was the beginning.
What was the offer?
I offered to invest $4 million at a $20 million valuation when I bought 20% of the company. And we bought 20%, which is why we ultimately ended up with 17% when it was sold for $1 billion. You could do the math. It was a really, really good outcome. And because we actually ended up owning 30% of the company after the second round, because we were the only investor in both rounds.
And why was that? What were the main struggles between Justin?
So this is why it's there's a reality in the story.
Yeah.
We invested in Twitch in 2007. They had done this first cohort of Y Combinator with Brian Chesky at Airbnb. There were like 3 companies in there that were multi-billion dollars. Twitch
Dropbox.
Was on Dropbox. Yeah, thank you. And so they were totally into Y Combinator, right? Because they went through that process, and it led them to do the right thing, which ended up being Justin TV and then Twitch. What was the question?
So what were the struggles? There's a bunch more questions I can ask.
Okay, Justin TV was not social media. Well, it kind of was in an early way, but Justin TV, this is when Web 2.0 is beginning to happen, but you could not stream video live just on the internet.
So what was he was streaming? He was live streaming his life. What was he streaming to?
Yeah, exactly. So you could do it on a computer. You could watch live streaming on a computer. The computer was connected to the internet. But if you were going to live stream your life to live stream, livecast is what we called it, you're not in front of a computer all the time. So it had to be on mobile. Right? The iPhone was introduced in 2007. And the internet was not functional enough on mobile. So he put a camera on his hat. That camera was connected to a computer in his backpack, a full computer, that had 3 modems attached to it, and he had endless battery packs to go with it, so that he could walk around 24 hours a day streaming what he was doing, and your view would be the camera on his hat, right? So this is a good anecdote here. The infamous moment was when he was dating a lady, and the lady was okay with him live streaming, but they went to bed, and he took the camera off, and the people that were watching his live stream went nuts. Why'd you take the camera off? We want to watch the whole thing 24 hours a day.
Truman Show.
Really pissed off that they didn't get to see what happened in the bedroom. And so,
how many people were watching?
That's the first kind of notion of viralness, because this became the press wrote about it. It was like, so that just fed the.
How many people were watching at this?
I don't know. I'd have to go back and look, but this is like maybe tens of thousands of these.
Yeah.
Because in live streaming, the issue is how many people are watching at the moment.
Yeah.
At any 1 second, how many people are watching?
Which, like, there are precursors to this. People tried to do this in 97, right? In 96 with real networks. And there's some real
networks was all audio.
There's some video thing that I remember, some crazy story that probably involved charlatans.
You know where Mark Cuban came from?
Yes, that might be it. Yeah.
He sold his video company to Yahoo for $1 billion.
Mhm.
whatever it was, 98 or so. Of course, that was a small part of Yahoo at the time, but he became a billionaire at that time.
Mm.
Uh, and it was a video business, and struggling to remember what was Mark Cuban's video company.
Well, we can do that later, but there's some sort of, I'm going to find a scam. There's some sort of scam that happened in the 90s related to the promise of doing this that didn't work out. But I want to keep on with this anecdote, which is
Oh, one of the earliest things was Napster,
yeah, but that's
which
streaming music peer to peer.
peer-to-peer, and it was highly distributed,
Yeah,
right? So they couldn't kind of stop it because you had thousands of servers enabling the streaming of music directly to. That was later though, but
yeah,
that was one of the very first instances of live streaming,
yeah.
but it was audio and music only.
Okay,
Um,
but let's go back into this. The Justin was about to go to bed with a lady, and he said takes it off. Good thing he did. That's shows some principles there.
some
And
restraint, which there are plenty of other things that were not restrained, but
yeah, oh God. Which yeah, because and Justin Khan seems like an interesting figure in general. But what so that happens, then what happens after that? What are the other struggles with Justin TV to turn it into Twitch?
well, so we had invested, I think it was 5 million for 20% of the company, which
Mhm.
would make 25 million. And then for the next round, they made the rounds as Justin TV of all the VCs, and nobody would touch it with a 10-foot pole because there was no economic model associated with Justin TV. The only vague model was that you could broadcast sports that were not licensed.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, you could also broadcast sports that were licensed, and as a result, a lot of the leagues were threatening to sue
yeah.
Justin TV, and they avoided significant suits. The only one was the World Wrestling thing, heavyweight wrestling.
Oh,
Anyway,
uh,
um, they did sue, but uh, what Justin TV did was they were very smart about it, and they said, well, they developed a whole takedown technology. They were the first company to do
yeah. Oh,
this.
interesting.
You tell us that they're violating your
Automatically.
copyrights, we'll automatically take it down
Yeah,
within seconds.
yeah,
Like, and
yeah.
so they were very good at that, and so they clearly demonstrate an intent not to step on license
Wait,
fees.
I've got a question. What does it look like to navigate that? Like you have the automated system, but people like the WWF or whatever, all these guys are threatening to sue. What are the conversations? Do they actually come out and say the cease and desist letter, or do they call or
There's a
yeah,
notice thing, right?
yeah,
So they notify the company, and the company would immediately take down the stream.
yeah,
And uh, so at some point we thought, well, maybe we could get like African soccer clubs or Japanese or Australian cricket clubs or
yeah,
something,
yeah,
stuff that wasn't
yeah.
licensed to pay for rebroadcasting, and we did a little bit of that, but it wasn't big enough to cover the cost of what we're doing. Um, so there was a transition point on Justin TV before Twitch, a period of a couple of years. Yeah, about a couple of years, where a company could not raise venture capital
Mm.
and it was consuming its cash. So we doubled down. We put another 3 million in at a 30 million valuation. So we bought another 10% of the company. So we ended up
Wait,
buying 30.
what justified the raise in valuation from 20 million to 30 million?
They wouldn't accept anything.
Okay,
Wouldn't
interesting.
accept it. It was a negotiation, right? And
Yeah,
I give them full credit.
yeah,
I'm sort of revealing too much here, but they operated as a unit, the four founders,
yeah,
and they made decisions. So you could talk to any one of the
yeah.
four, and they go, "Well, I have to go talk to my co-founders." So there's never a kind of real-time negotiation, except that first time when I was in the apartment and made the offer.
Yeah.
um, and uh, so I was the only other board member, um, and um, so it was always very difficult to
Yeah,
negotiate with these guys.
yeah.
They just decided what they were going to do. In fact, they came up with Twitch, and I give them full credit for that.
Uh,
But there was a period of time where we couldn't raise money, so we doubled down to keep the company alive. And as part of that, and I can't remember if it was by agreement or they just did it anyway. They did what I call programming for dollars. So they would generate
services.
traffic
Yeah.
and
Wait.
sell advertising against that. And they
Oh,
got to the point where they were making money, but they didn't need to raise more money. And that was the major turning point, because then they were sitting there going, well, what do we do with this business? It's not huge. It's not going to like be really valuable. And Emmett Shear proposed to his co-founders, Justin, Michael, and Kyle, um, that they focus on the video game category because he was a video game player and he saw what the value was. So it's just a small amount of traffic doing this at the time, but he said, no, this can scale, and then we can sell advertising against it. And so that's what they did.
hmm.
So the 4 years before Twitch emerged and they introduced it was a real struggle, right? And
Yeah.
it's really hard to figure out what's going on, but they were just kind of working it out in real time. And I was behind them. I wasn't on it. And
What do you mean by that?
well, we'd have board meetings and they'd come in and tell me what was going on.
And is that work differently from other companies?
Normally, investors are more involved, but it's either way. This is part of my point of view that investors really don't make companies. It's like you
Yeah.
have to bet on people who make the company successful. Because I wouldn't bet on myself starting a company. I did once and lost $1 million. So
But you started other companies that were successful.
I have not started a successful company.
Well, no,
As-
you started newsletters and conferences, which is a type of
yeah,
company, but not
these are
not a
not
scalable internet tech company. Is that
bingo.
what you're talking about? All right, yeah.
It's a lifestyle business.
Oh, interesting. So those are lifestyle businesses. So what is another company in that batch that is really interesting? That
Twitter,
2006, what is it?
Twitter.
No, no, I'm saying that you invested in. We could talk about Twitter as well,
Oh,
but
yeah. Well,
yeah.
that's the thing. So we did not invest in another social media company. All right. If you look at the
Which was,
foundings,
yeah, interesting.
Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, uh,
Yeah.
there was a set of social media companies before that that failed, but and I can't remember the tribe.net, and there were a couple of others.
Yeah.
So there were early signs, but the ones that really succeeded were the ones that were founded in that period of time. And I think it was 2006 to 2010. When
Yeah.
was Facebook started? Do you have that?
2006. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was might have started 2005, but 2006 was when everybody got on it.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
it started as .edu, the
Mhm.
college thing. But that had scale. That was scaling, and that's why
Mhm.
Excel bought on it. Peter Thiel bought on it. And Twitter was founded when?
Probably around the same time, 2000. I'm good. Twitter.
'Cause Twitter was a mistake. It
Uh,
was founded out of the failure of another company.
uh-huh. Oh yeah, the Bootstrap or whatever.
Uh,
The we found it.
Well, they were like a podcasting or something company, and that didn't work. And so they were playing
2006.
a game, and they just started Twitter, and like, this is
Yeah.
cool, and it
This,
just
this
fell.
this is interesting territory. Also, four founders. They also had four founders that both Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, all of them started in that same era, and it's
Yeah,
right after where it happened. And it's sort of like it's by the time everybody forgot, it was almost, I guess 2000 to 2006 was the last time period where humanity was normal. Before humanity got eviscerated
up by social media.
schizophrenically, which goes back to the question I had earlier, which is like, what were the other companies? What were the other bets that you made in 2006? They were deep tech, hard tech, right?
Yeah, we
Because
did a lot of cybersecurity.
yeah,
It's. I mean, this is the dirty laundry of Alsop partners.
yeah,
We're really dedicated to hard technology,
yeah.
cybersecurity, and going forward, we did Fund 2, we did a semiconductor company, and
Whoa, whoa,
that was our thesis,
yeah.
right? And the Evernight was a part of that thesis, but we kind of missed social media.
Mhm.
Justin TV wasn't really social media. It was like
But
this
it,
weird.
it it did turn out to be social media, but not one of
Twitch
the
was social
obvious
media.
ones. Yeah,
Twitch was social media. It was
yeah.
all based on the
Live
hell's it,
streaming.
not just web streaming. What was the theory behind it? It's 6 degrees of connection with any other person.
Uh-huh.
Um, there's a name for that. The social graph.
Yeah.
It was
Uh-huh.
based on the
Uh-huh.
social graph, like how
Uh-huh.
you connected to other
Yeah.
people and how that scaled.
Yeah.
And so we didn't do Facebook. We didn't do Twitter. Actually, tried to get into, and I tried to get them to
Oh,
pay
interesting.
attention, and I did not
Oh, let's talk about that.
see.
What did you try to do?
So I kept pinging who was the first CEO.
Jack Dorsey,
Was Jack the
Noah
CEO and
Glass, Biz Stone, Evan Williams.
Biz and Ev. Ev, I got to know Ev, and
Okay.
I pushed my way in, but at the same time I was doing that, Fred Wilson from Union Square Ventures just gave him a term sheet, and they took it.
Oh, so if you had instead of networked with them, if you had just given them the same way
Just
and you did it with
walked in and
Twitch.
gave him
Oh,
a term sheet.
interesting. Oh, interesting.
Because I was there. I was in San Francisco, and you know, I was actually physically in San Francisco, living in before I bought my house, but
Yeah.
living in the Presidio,
Yeah.
and that's where we started Alsop Louis. It was in my house in the Presidio, and
Oh,
so I was in that milieu, and I saw Twitter. I have a very early number as one of the first signups for Twitter, like
yeah.
several thousand, but
Yeah. So you're
and
hearing about it early and you knew something
because
was
it
coming.
appealed to me too. It was complete 140
Yeah.
characters. Like
Yeah.
all of my creative background was
Short.
the
Yeah.
the short, but
Yeah.
and the more you can kind of encapsulate a thought in a short time, that's a creative constraint that if you
Yeah.
can figure out how to do that. So I thought it was brilliant that they did 140 characters. In fact, I think they've lost a lot of it by expanding it. But that's because the company was really badly managed, and that's was
Yeah.
Musk's opportunity. But um, so I thought I would just build a relationship.
Yeah. Interesting.
Meanwhile, Fred Wilson just gave him a term sheet and became the lead investor in Twitter. And he had to deal with all the crap that went on in that company. And yet, despite all the crap that went on in that company, it went public and was worth billions of dollars. It was a huge outcome. For
It
Union
all goes
Square's
back to
Ventures, which is in their first fund, right? USB one.
it all goes back to the irrational versus rational investing. And you guys were very rationally like hard tech.
Very rational.
Yeah,
Gillen and
yeah,
I,
yeah.
totally rational. We
But it
tried.
is rational because it is happening now. The hard tech, deep tech thing is happening now.
Oh, it's underlying. You can be right and
Yeah.
still not make money.
But to be right and make money, you have to be irrational because you have to go where everyone else is.
I'll find the people like I
Yeah,
had a term sheet for Elon Musk at
yeah,
X.com
yeah.
that if I delivered it to him, it's still not sure that Mike Moritz wouldn't have done it anyway, because
Uh-huh.
maybe he's got a better relationship with Elon. But I hadn't pissed him off at that point. So I had the opportunity and I walked away from it.
Yeah,
Right? What's that say about me?
yeah,
Did I overthink that? Like there's this like material adverse
yeah,
conditions
yeah,
clause, and you don't. And I was, that
yeah.
was my second year as a VC, so
Overthinking. Yeah,
I was being rational,
yeah,
right? This guy was crazy, but fuck, crazy, crazy. I mean, if I'd done X.com, I would have potentially done SpaceX and Tesla and
yeah.
been one of those people that, shoot, I'd be good buddies with Donald Trump now because I'd be a billionaire.
Uh, how much would you have liked that? Well, there's a lot of different questions that we can go to.
Just as part of that,
Yeah.
Mike Moritz did not do SpaceX, right? Mike Moritz pissed Musk off
Oh,
and hired a CEO and then sold the company. And Elon says this is all he was into this, but actually he was fighting it tooth and nail because he didn't want to be part of PayPal.
oh, interesting.
Now he's part of the PayPal mafia.
Um, yes, and Elon Musk is a highly irrational figure. But then, it's
Oh,
not
he's
irrational.
absolutely rational. He's absolutely rational. This is what really tricks everybody up. He like looks at the fundamentals in a in a in a completely rational way, right?
Yeah,
So rational because he's got this intellect that he can
yeah,
think about AI and he can think about tunneling and Mars and all this
yeah,
shit. And
yeah.
it's completely rational, but it's so far ahead of everybody else
That he
that
seems irrational.
yeah,
Yeah,
but just as I had this conversation this morning with my
yeah,
good buddy,
yeah,
Social Security is such a burn point for anybody to talk about it that nobody's willing to touch
yeah,
Social Security. But it
yeah,
goes to the level of Social Security is operating on COBOL on mainframes. And what Doge is doing is going in and saying, we have to reprogram the
Yeah,
systems
yeah,
real time
yeah,
and it's secure and blah, blah, blah. It's like, they're bringing modern tech thinking to Social Security, which is the oldest infrastructure
yeah.
you can imagine. And the
Mm.
only safety in that in Social Security is that it's so old and so creaky that nobody can figure out how to hack it. They don't know COBOL.
But well, is COBOL more secure?
Not necessarily. It's just it's secure in a roundabout way
Secure
because
by obscurity.
yeah, by
Yeah, yeah,
obscurity.
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so I mean, we could keep on going for a long time. This is very interesting territory. But there's one question that's kind of been going in the back of my mind, which is, do you regret, because you were at that party when you were at Agenda, you demo, you had all these people coming to you as a sort of a source or a source giver for as a journalist, and then you talked to, I think we interviewed him, the guy who at Excel Partners and or somebody else at a party, and you said, I'm bored. I don't want to do this anymore. And
Yeah,
then,
we did interview.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
the old moment,
Yeah.
senior moment.
Yeah.
One.
Well, I've got it as well. I don't remember his name, but we got it on one of our first shows. Actually, I should republish that to the Stewart Squared podcast because it's on just on the crazy wisdom part. But
Yeah, there it is.
uh so um but do you regret moving? Could you have kept on as a journalist while you were a
Oh,
VC?
no,
No,
I
you
have
had to
no
stop.
doubts, no doubts about this. I
Yeah,
was bored, first of
yeah,
all,
yeah.
because shit was happening and it wasn't about being a journalist anymore. I was about participating.
Oh.
And so when I told, God, it's right on the tip of my tongue, but when I said to that guy,
Mm,
I'm bored, that was true reflection because like the internet was beginning to happen. There was a lot of stuff, and I
mm.
wasn't plugged into that
Okay.
the way I was plugged into the personal computer industry. So I saw it happening and I participated, right? I went and got a Mosaic browser and I started browsing and I had that experience, but reporting on it was like, whatever. So I was bored as a journalist editor. So I wanted to change careers. And he correctly identified venture capital. And so I don't regret that at all.
Mm, mm,
But if I have a regret, it's because there's a transition from being a journalist and focused on the truth to being a venture capitalist and focused on the irrational part, right? This is like I was still applying journalistic principles or practice
we're
to being
waiting.
a venture capitalist, and I hadn't switched, right? In the way that Mike Moritz and John Doerr and other people had to focus on kind of the underlying things and looking for people who could make a difference. But
Why?
that one Elon Musk decision was like
Oh,
one of my big regrets.
so
Um,
journalist focuses on the truth because they're looking for the right story,
yeah,
and a
they're looking to
VC
be right.
they're looking to
They
be
want to be right.
right. Oh, interesting.
And
Whereas a
the
VC,
measure of right is in the next couple of weeks or months,
oh,
right?
it's the time focused. It's
Elon
based
Musk
on
is
time.
right if you look at it in terms of years and even decades.
Okay, this brings a really interesting point, which is I've been reading the book Georgetown Set, and it
Yeah.
reiterates the fact that Uncle Joe was really, really right on a small times frame from 1950, 1946. Him and Stewart were the only ones accurately recognizing the new Cold War. They both accurately predicted to the point where the U.S. government had to figure it out that they both accurately predicted that Soviet Union was developing nuclear hydrogen bombs, Sputnik, all these different things. They predicted all those things about 4 to 5 years earlier. But also, he was really wrong in a lot of other ways in terms of the context in becoming a hawk for
Uncle
Vietnam.
Joe was wrong in a way that my daddy
Yeah,
wasn't, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
because um, had a bug up his butt basically, and he couldn't get over it, right? Um, so Vietnam was his nadir. He was wrong about Vietnam.
Yeah, he was wrong about Vietnam. Yeah, it's really interesting, but we'll go into that another time. Well, that was a fun one. Anything else? Any last thoughts on what we've talked about this time?
I'm still trying to figure out. You asked me a question. What were the kind of key companies in the
2006.
between 2006 and 2010 or whatever?
Yeah,
I remember, and there was 2008 is the financial crisis, which is when we raised our second fund.
yeah,
That
we
was
should talk
before I
about that
just
one next time.
yeah.
We should talk about
So,
it. Yeah.
but yeah, I got to give some thought. But what were the what were the companies that came out of the odds? besides the social media companies.
And the
And
stories
AWS
behind
is
the
one of them, but it
founders,
was started by Amazon. So
and the stories behind the founders as well.
yeah,
Well, that was fun.
we, we can keep that going.
Yeah.